I pulled into the driveway after 3 days on the road and saw an oil stain where my Audi should have been. My mother-in-law stood on the porch, hands folded, smiling like she'd just baked me a cake. "The family voted," she said. "Melissa gets the car now." My husband shuffled behind her, eyes glued to the concrete. I was too stunned to speak, but my silence wasn't new. What they didn't know was that the car was never mine. And in less than 48 hours, a company audit would turn their little vote into a crisis that could erase my career. My name is Lena Hartley, and this is Tranquil Drama Stories. If you've ever been told your success belongs to everyone but you, stay with me. The empty rectangle of concrete still had a smear of oil and a few dead leaves. My sister-in-law, Melissa, came down the steps twirling my keyring around her finger, the enamel charm I'd bought at an airport gift shop still attached. "You're gone all the time anyway," she said. "It just sat here." Behind her, my niece Emma, 6 years old, peeked out and stared at me with that unfiltered curiosity children have before adults teach them to look away. I stood in a driveway full of people who shared my last name and felt completely alone. My husband, Ben, didn't say a word. His silence was already a habit that I'd spent 7 years mistaking for peacekeeping. Later, at the dinner table, my mother-in-law Diane served pot roast and told the story of the vote like it was a bedtime tale. We went around the room, everyone said their piece, and it was unanimous. That's how this family works, fair and square. She believed it. To her, moving my car to Melissa wasn't theft. It was governance. She even recited the family motto, the one she trotted out every holiday: "What's good for one is good for the family." Everyone nodded. I'd nodded for 7 years because nodding was easier than fighting. I spent that night at our own house, staring at my laptop. A routine email from Fleet Compliance at Crestview Medical Technologies, where I'd worked as a senior sales rep for 8 years, sat in my inbox. Quarterly fleet audit this coming Monday at 9 a.m. All assigned vehicles must be physically verified at their registered addresses. Any vehicle unaccounted for will be flagged as misappropriated, pending investigation. I read the word misappropriated 5 times. The Audi A6 I drove 40,000 miles a year to hospitals wasn't a perk. It was a fleet vehicle titled to the company. I'd signed a custody agreement that made me personally responsible for its location and condition. Unauthorized transfer of possession, exactly what Diane's vote had accomplished, was grounds for termination and potential referral to law enforcement. The car had a sticker price of $70,000. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a career-ending landmine. I sat in the dark doing the math. If I stayed quiet to keep the family peace, I lost my job. If I acted, I detonated the fragile thing I'd protected for years. There was no version of Monday morning where I got to keep both. By Sunday morning, Melissa had posted a photo of the Audi on social media. A big bow stuck to the windshield. Captioned "My new baby. Drinks tonight to celebrate." Dozens of people congratulated her. Then, a comment appeared from Priya, a district manager 2 levels above me. "Isn't that a company fleet car? The Crestview plate frame is visible." My 2 worlds had just collided in a public post. The deadline suddenly felt louder. I called Fleet Compliance that Sunday. Andrea Mills, the officer who handled these audits, answered with the tired calm of someone who'd heard every excuse. I explained that a family member had taken the vehicle without authorization, and I intended to get it back before the audit. She didn't scold or sympathize. "Every vehicle has GPs," she said. "Yours hasn't been at your registered address since Thursday. The custody agreement puts responsibility on you, not whoever's driving it." Then, she asked the question that made my hands go cold. "Do you want us to open a recovery order? Or will the vehicle be returned voluntarily by Monday?" A recovery order meant the company would send its own tow operator to repossess the car with a police case number, the nuclear option. I asked for 24 hours. I told her I believed I could get the car back peacefully. Andrea gave me until Monday at 7 a.m., the latest she could hold the order and still verify it before the 9 audit. After that, it was out of both our hands. I drove to Diane's house that afternoon with a genuine offer. I found her and Melissa in the kitchen and explained the car had to be returned, no exceptions. But I understood Melissa needed transportation. I'd help her buy a sensible used car, a few years old. Low miles, and I'd put real money toward it. I meant every word. Melissa laughed. A used car? I already have an Audi sitting outside. Diane set down her dish towel and folded her hands. Lena, the family voted. We sat down together and decided. I don't understand why you keep fighting something that's already done. That's when I finally saw the truth. It was never about the car being fair. It was about the vote being sacred, a ritual that let them feel generous while taking what they wanted. You can't reason someone out of a feeling that makes them righteous. Ben followed me onto the porch, and for once he spoke, though I would have given anything to unhear it. I might have, over the years, sort of let Mom think the car was more of a company gift than a work thing. It made it easier. She gets weird about money. I just never corrected her when she assumed. He winced. There's a difference. There wasn't. And we both knew it. If he'd let Diane believe it was a gift, then every time she recited her motto, "What's good for one is good for the family," she'd been mentally including a $70,000 asset she thought I'd been handed as a bonus. He hadn't just failed to defend me. He'd spent years quietly building the exact misunderstanding that made this theft feel legitimate. The vote hadn't come from nowhere. It had been watered by a man who found the truth about his own wife too inconvenient to say out loud. I drove home and went straight to the file cabinet where I keep every important document, because I'm the one in this marriage who keeps important documents. Inside the folder marked employment, I found the custody agreement I'd signed 3 years earlier. There it was, in plain language: employee assumes personal liability for the company titled vehicle. Unauthorized transfer of possession constitutes grounds for termination and potential referral to law enforcement. I held that paper, and something in me went quiet and clear. All weekend I'd been fighting to get my car back, but it had never been my car. That was the punchline none of them understood. They'd held a solemn vote to redistribute something none of them owned. And in doing it, they'd put my name, my job, my entire career on the line for a vehicle that was only ever passing through my hands. I made copies of the agreement, the audit email, and the relevant policy pages. I wasn't building a case to humiliate anyone. I was doing the thing I'd refused to do for 7 years, making the truth impossible to talk around. For most of my marriage, I'd believed that saying the plain truth out loud was a kind of aggression. That, if I loved enough and gave enough, the facts would sort themselves out, without me having to be the one who stated them. That was the lie underneath all my quiet. Sunday evening, the driveway party was in full swing. Diane had set up a folding table with lemonade and cookies. Melissa stood with a cluster of friends around the Audi, the bow still on the windshield, the porch light hitting the hood just right. Neighbors had drifted over. Maybe 15 people in all, holding plastic cups and admiring a car that belonged to a medical device company 40 miles away. I sat in my rental across the street for a full minute, feeling the old fear rise, the one that whispered, "Don't make a scene. Don't be the difficult one." Then I thought about the word misappropriated with my name next to it, and I got out. I walked up the driveway with the folder under my arm. Heads turned. Melissa's smile flickered. Diane straightened by the lemonade. Ben, over by the porch, went very still. Emma sat on the front step with a cookie, watching everything with those frank 6-year-old eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I set the folder on the hood of the Audi next to the bow, opened it, and spoke in the calmest tone I owned. This car is owned by Crestview Medical Technologies. It's a fleet vehicle with a GPS tracker, a company title, and a custody agreement that makes me personally responsible. It was never a gift. It was never mine to give, and it was never yours to vote on. The friends around the car went silent. Melissa looked from the papers to her mother, waiting for Diane to fix it the way Diane always fixed things. Diane's face hardened. "Don't do that," she said, voice thin and bright. "Don't stand here and invent paperwork to keep the car for yourself. This family voted, Lena. We sat down together and voted fair and square. What's good for one is good for the family." A few neighbors nodded because it sounded so noble. I looked at the folder on the hood, the plain black and white truth, sitting in a driveway full of people who preferred the story. I understood I was not fighting a lie. I was fighting a wall built one holiday at a time. Melissa snatched the folder and threw it. The papers scattered across the driveway, my signature and the VIN sliding under the tires. "Fake," she said. "You printed those tonight. You'd do anything not to share." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. I looked at Ben. He stared at the scattered papers, then at his mother. And he said nothing. Again. That was the moment something clicked over in me. Quietly and permanently. I'd been operating on the belief that if I presented the evidence clearly, calmly, they would have to see it. But they didn't have a truth problem. They had chosen the story that let them keep the car and feel generous. No document was going to talk them out of that. I bent down, picked up every paper in front of everyone, and placed them back in the folder without hurrying. Then I drove home. Ben followed me. At our kitchen table, I made him tell me the whole truth. Over the years, he'd minimized my job so his mother wouldn't feel outdone. He'd let her believe my salary was modest, so she wouldn't ask why we didn't give more. When I paid for things, he let them think it was his money, so no one felt indebted. He'd edited me down into a version his family could be comfortable with, a version who gave and never had anything of her own worth mentioning. It kept the peace, he said, using the same soft plea that had ended every conversation before it could become an argument. Just keep the peace, Lena. For me, I finally heard what it actually meant. Keep yourself small. Keep yourself quiet. Keep being the wife who absorbs everything so I never have to stand up to my own mother. My silence hadn't been a gift. It had been the raw material they built the entire lie from. I sat alone long after Ben went to bed. For 7 years, I'd worn my silence like a virtue. Now I saw it from the outside. Every time I swallowed something to keep the peace, I hadn't been rising above conflict. I'd been teaching them that my boundaries were suggestions. Diane hadn't taken the car because she was cruel. She'd taken it because my nodding had taught her that whatever I had, the family could have, and I had never once given her a reason to believe otherwise. At 7 o'clock Monday morning, I called Andrea Mills and said the words I'd spent all weekend avoiding. Open the recovery order. My voice didn't shake. Andrea dispatched a contracted tow operator to the vehicle's GPS location. She also advised me to file a report with the local non-emergency line so there'd be a case number on record. I did exactly that. Then I got in my rental and drove to Diane's house. If a truck was going to repossess that car with my case number attached, I was going to stand there and own it. My phone buzzed the whole way, Ben texting, "Don't do this. Mom will never forgive you. Call it off. Then, if you go through with this, I don't know what happens to us." I read them at a red light and set the phone face down. For 7 years, his discomfort had been the emergency that overrode everything. This time I kept driving. If you've ever felt the weight of a silence you didn't choose, hit like and subscribe to Tranquil Drama Stories. The calm I'd hidden behind was about to become the calm I finally used. I pulled up to Diane's house. She and Melissa were already outside, standing near the Audi like guards. When they saw my rental, relief washed over their faces. They thought I'd come to apologize. Diane even started toward me with her arms half open. "There she is. I knew you'd come to your senses. Sit down. Have coffee. We'll put this whole silly thing behind us." I didn't sit. "I'm not here to apologize," I said. "A recovery truck is on its way. The company is repossessing its vehicle. I wanted you to hear it from me first." For a second, nobody moved. Then, from down the street, came the low diesel growl of a heavy truck downshifting. Every head turned. Diane recovered fast. "Call it off," she said, stepping toward me. "Whatever you started, you can stop it. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." So I made a phone call, but not the one she wanted. I called Andrea, put the phone on speaker, and set it on the folding table next to the lemonade. Andrea's voice came out clear and flat, confirming recovery on the Crestview Fleet vehicle. "Unauthorized possession has been logged with a police case number. Our operator is en route. Is the vehicle accessible?" I looked at Diane and answered, "It's accessible. It's in the driveway." Silence pressed down on that yard. Diane's face, for the first time in 7 years, went pale. The word unauthorized hung in the air where her motto usually lived. The flatbed rounded the corner, amber lights turning slow and steady. Neighbors came onto their porches. A man watering his lawn 2 houses down stood frozen, the hose running into the grass. Melissa rushed to the Audi and yanked the bow off the windshield, clutching it to her chest as if removing the decoration could change the title. Emma came out in her school clothes and watched with wide eyes. "Mommy, are they taking the car back?" she asked. No one answered. So I knelt to her level and said gently, "Yes, sweetheart. It has to go back to the people who really own it." She nodded slowly, filing that away. At least one person in this family would grow up knowing the difference between a gift and something you just took. The operator climbed down with a clipboard and verified the VIN against his paperwork. He showed Diane the ownership documentation and the case number. He was unfailingly polite and completely immovable. Diane read the documents. I watched her understand, in real time, that the papers Melissa had thrown the night before had been true all along. Instead of turning to me, she turned to Ben. "Say something. Do something. Are you going to let them take it?" Every face swung to my husband. He stood with his hands in his pockets, the same pose he'd held 4 days earlier. He opened his mouth, and nothing came out. His silence, invisible for years because it always hid behind my noise, was suddenly the loudest thing in the driveway. Then he crossed to me, took my elbow, and steered me onto the porch. His voice dropped to the private register he used when he needed something. "Lena, please, you can still stop this. Tell the guy to give us a week. Sign whatever puts it on hold. Just don't let them drag it out of here in front of the whole street. In front of my mother." His eyes were wet, his hand warm on my arm, and every trained instinct screamed at me to fix his distress. "If you let this happen, I don't know if we survive it. I can't stand here and choose between my wife and my mother." There it was, finally said out loud, the choice he'd been forcing on me for years. Except he'd gotten it exactly backward. He thought he was the one being asked to choose. He'd already chosen, 100 times. Every time he stayed quiet and let me pay. I looked at him for a long moment. I looked at the man I'd spent 7 years trying to please, whose comfort I'd put ahead of my job, my truth, my name. A week wouldn't fix it. It would just be 7 more years wearing a disguise. If I signed that hold, I'd keep disappearing, one polite concession at a time, until there was no Lena left at all. I found that I did not want to keep it anymore. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I didn't argue. I simply turned away from my husband, looked across the driveway at the tow operator, and nodded. Just a nod. The operator nodded back, and the winch began to turn. Behind me, Ben said my name like something tearing. Diane's voice cut through, shrill and disbelieving. "You'd humiliate this family over a car?" I turned back and answered in the calmest voice I have ever used. "It was never mine to give. It was never yours to vote on." The chain snugged tight, and the Audi settled onto the flatbed. $70,000 of somebody else's property going back where it belonged. I stood perfectly still, not crying, not gloating, just watching. Melissa sobbed into her mother's shoulder, still clutching that crumpled bow. And Diane, watching the car she'd voted away roll onto a stranger's truck, said something I've never been able to forget. She wasn't looking at me. Her voice came out small and old and stripped of all its certainty. "No one ever asked me what I wanted," she said. "My whole life, my mother-in-law took what she wanted and I took what I could. And no one ever once asked me." For just a second, I understood her completely. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman who'd been robbed young by the same machine she was now running, who'd survived by becoming the one who took. I understood it. It didn't change a single thing I was going to do, but I understood it. As the flatbed pulled away, I looked at Diane and gave her back her own motto changed. Quietly, "Just for the two of us," I said. "What's good for one, she gets to keep." Then the truck turned the corner, and the car was gone. I called Andrea to confirm the vehicle was in transit. My job, the career I'd built one hospital account at a time, survived the weekend intact. Ben did not walk me to my rental. He stood on his mother's porch, and I understood my marriage had climbed onto the flatbed with the car. We separated within a month. The divorce was final the following spring. Diane never apologized. To this day, she believes I humiliated the family over a car. Melissa blocked me on everything. The machine that ran that family kept right on running, but I'd broken one link my own. I was no longer the channel that quietly moved my life into their hands whenever they decided they needed it more. A few months later, I bought myself a car, a sensible sedan, the kind I'd once offered to Melissa. The title arrived with my name only, and I sat in my driveway holding it for a long while. In October, Ben texted that the family wanted me at Thanksgiving, that everyone was willing to let it go. I read it twice. There was no apology anywhere, just an invitation to pretend nothing happened. I replied that I'd come the day someone offered a real one. The last time I saw my niece Emma, she asked why I didn't have the pretty car anymore. I knelt down and told her the truest thing I know. You don't have to give something away just because someone tells you the whole family agreed. She thought about it, then nodded. I used to think staying quiet made me the bigger person. All it ever did was make me easier to overrule. The day I stopped voting against myself was the day I finally got to keep my own life. If you've ever swallowed the truth to keep the peace, tell me in the comments what it cost you. And subscribe to Tranquil Drama Stories next week. Another quiet woman decides the quiet isn't worth it anymore.